The battle between Indra and Asura Otsutsuki is an endless one. An endless cycle of living, fighting, dying, repeating. Generally, when one makes mention of the battle between them, we immediately think of Sasuke and Naruto, but they're not the only ones to have ever fought this battle. Hashirama and Madara were another pair who also fought like this. For a while, it seemed believable that Hashirama and Madara would become friends, found a nation, and redeem their relationship which had been severed by Indra when his father chose Asura as his successor. But this was not so. In the end, they pressed on for battle and Hashirama was forced to kill his friend for the sake of the village. It wouldn't take too long for Izanagi to activate and restore Madara to life, and then, while hiding, he would graft Hashirama's flesh onto his body to heal his wounds, unintentionally awakening his Rinnegan years later. The main events of the Naruto storyline would then happen thereafter, with Madara, or at least his legacy, being felt until his return in the Fourth Shinobi World War. But I do wonder what would have happened if he had won. How would things have changed? What kind of world would it be had Hashirama been killed at the Valley of the End? Welcome to the Amagi. Before we begin, we publish a new video every day, so be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. The Amagi's reach stretches beyond just this channel, so if you're a fan of us, please consider subscribing to our other channels and following us on all of our social media. Help us reach our goal of passing 100,000 followers on all of our accounts by the end of the year. The story starts after the Warring States period. After years and years of fighting, whole generations lost to the bloodshed, childhood frenemies decide to set aside their differences and form a village. That village becoming known as Konoha. It had always been Hashirama and Madara's dream to create a place where children would be safe from war. But alas, war drove them apart. They both were not only part of opposing clans, but they were eventually set to inherit the positions of clan head. For years, they fought until it grew obvious that the Senju were getting an advantage. More and more of the Uchiha were slowly defecting, and in almost every engagement, Hashirama proved to be superior to his friend. Madara, having already lost his brother, and even with his newly awakened Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, failed to defeat Hashirama. Madara prepared for the end, and Tobirama was willing to oblige him. However, Hashirama threatened to commit suicide if it would end this war, and nearly carved himself open until Madara himself stopped him. It was at this moment that the two forged peace. Furthermore, they created a village. Slowly though, Madara began to lose faith in the village. He began to believe that Senju dominance was becoming clear, and that the Uchiha would slowly rot in the darkness of neglect. Upon reading an Uchiha stone tablet, he became convinced that the village was a failed experiment, and tried to convince both Hashirama and the Uchiha of such, but neither believed him. Madara then decided to leave the village. He grew to resent the people of Konoha, and often attempted to attack them, but it wasn't until he brought with him the Nine Tails that things really reached a head. Controlling Kurama using the Sharingan, Madara and Hashirama did battle in a place that would later become known as the Valley of the End, a waterfall that would bear statues on either side of it for both of the warriors who fought here. It was in this battle that Hashirama killed Madara, sort of. But what if the roles had been reversed? What if Hashirama had made one mistake that Madara could capitalize upon? Hashirama would likely be impaled on Kurama's claw and perish there. And what would happen next? Madara would look down from atop the Nine Tails head at the corpse of Hashirama Senju. His mind would rush with nostalgia because of this battle. After so many years, it is almost as if nothing had changed, a short interlude between past battles, nearly tricking the mind into believing that the present was still the past. But it wasn't. The entire reason why he was here was to destroy something he erroneously built in hopes of attaining peace. He had believed he and Hashirama together might be able to end war entirely. But the longer he lived, the more he realized that the only thing that existed in reality was suffering and futility. And that was what he had experienced. The suffering of war and the futility of protecting peace. In the end, there would always be another war, more shedding of blood. The leaders who waged war believed that through their acts they might bring light into the world. But where light was, shadow could also be found. And so long as anyone could win a war, someone would have to lose. War didn't last forever between people. Conceptually, so long as values and beliefs were different, the concept of war would live. He came to realize that love and hate, peace and war, light and dark are dueling concepts, and are all a part of the causal cycle. This was reality, but where else was there to live? Reality was a disappointment. Fate was an insult. But how could things be changed? As it turned out, it wouldn't be impossible. He would need a few things, but he was already getting ahead of himself. Once more looking down upon the body, he felt a short twinge of sorrow at seeing Hashirama's corpse, but that was outweighed by his battle high. Every drop of adrenaline surged through his limbs. Now wasn't a time to rest, it was time to continue his plans. Madara would ride atop the Ninetales and enter into the village hidden in the leaves. He would quickly be met with Tobirama Senju, who would call out to him, asking what he had done with Hashirama. Madara would let his wicked smile be his only answer. It was all he needed to do. All Tobirama needed to see to know. Tobirama Senju was a natural genius and was hailed as the fastest shinobi ever. He was always inventing new techniques and abilities, such as his signature, the Flying Thunder God technique. He would also go on to create the Impure World Reincarnation Jutsu. His natural love of learning and experimenting would be normally passed on to his student, Hiruzen Sarutobi, and then inherited and twisted by Orochimaru thereafter. However, such a thing at this point would never get a chance to happen. Madara's attack on Konoha is unexpectedly overpowered. He uses the Ninetales under his Genjutsu to target both Senju and Uchiha alike. He would personally fight against Tobirama during the Ninetales attacks. Tobirama is quick, being able to speed past even Madara, and his varied use of techniques is impressive. But even still, Madara still maintains the advantage in battle. Madara would still be able to do some damage, and when awakening his Eternal Mangekyo Sharingan, he would be able to eventually pin Tobirama down. Madara would relish the anger and rage Tobirama was feeling at the death of Hashirama. While it wasn't as satisfying as it could be, given how reserved Tobirama is, Madara could still tell. With the mistakes Tobirama was making, Madara didn't need to see his pain to know it was there. And that was perfect. Maybe now, Tobirama knew how Madara felt when he killed Izuna. Finally cornering Tobirama, he would unleash the black flames of Amaterasu on him, consuming him. Now, I know what you're thinking. We don't know what Madara's true Mangekyo abilities are, so this is really a bunch of headcanon. Well, yeah, sorta. This is sorta headcanon, but it is a logical one. Let me explain. Sasuke Uchiha, Madara's direct successor, possessed Amaterasu in his left eye, and with his right eye he had Kagutsuchi, which allowed him to manipulate the flames of Amaterasu to give it accuracy and utility features. Now, stepping back a few thousand years, Indra Otsutsuki also possessed a similar ability. In his left eye, he possesses the ability Hino Kagutsuchi, which not only possesses a similar name to Sasuke's right eye ability, but also functions almost exactly the same as Amaterasu. Beyond this, Indra and Sasuke possess the same full-body Susanoo. In the anime, Indra's Mangekyo Sharingan received a redesign in which it was identical in shape to Sasuke's. Now, all of these abilities and appearances were likely used as a storytelling device to visually link Indra as Sasuke's previous incarnation. However, the similarities are astounding. And despite the fact that Madara's Mangekyo Sharingan, as well as his Susanoo, both of which are the most badass in design, not just because Madara is my favorite character, possess a different design from Sasuke's and Indra's, it doesn't mean he doesn't have a variation of Amaterasu, given that even Madara himself states that there are similarities in Sasuke and his own Sharingan that aren't common, such as the straight Tomoe they possess. All this being said, and given that I really like Amaterasu, I think it's logical that Madara Uchiha possesses the ability. So for this what if, we will act as if he does possess it. After Tobirama Senju is fried, the Ninetales would then finish destroying the Hidden Leaf. There are very few survivors, with the only ones able to survive being those who fled the village, as there is nothing left. Those tailed beast balls will do that to a village. Once the village is wiped off the map, Madara would begin to contemplate his next moves. According to the Uchiha Stone Tablet, the secrets to awakening the Rinnegan was to merge Senju and Uchiha Chakra. And to do that, he would return to the Valley of the End, where he would find Hashirama Senju. He would carve away some of his flesh and then graft it to his body. Madara wouldn't expect an immediate result, but to be frank, I'm certain he didn't expect it to take 50 years. This is a plan-killing setback for Madara, as he needs those old Rinnegan to fulfill his plan, but they don't awaken until he's too old to use it. He needs a backup plan. Beginning to feel it was all for nothing, Madara would attempt to return to the futility of peacekeeping, but his version of peacekeeping isn't very kind. He slowly would search out the other tailed beasts. Once he had, he would use them as both threat and deterrence as he builds a new nation all his own. He would begin recruiting other clans to his new village, and then begin to launch attacks on other shinobi villages, essentially initiating the First Shinobi World War. The difference this time is that all villages are allied against Madara's village hidden in the Embers. You like that name? Just came up with it on the fly. But the biggest thing to recognize about this war is how one-sided it is, and I'm not talking about the nations against Madara. The shinobi villages are the ones at the disadvantage, because Madara, by this point, would have already completed his tailed beast collection, and now has all 9 tailed beasts. He would let those he trusts and believe are strong enough to lead some of them into battle and ultimately decimate enemy nations. With doing this, he would try to rule the nations as their supreme leader. He believed that might made right, and that respect through force was what would ultimately lead the world to peace. However, as you know, people tend to stand against dictators, and the bravest among us always do stand up. So he would be plagued from village to village with insurgents who would want to tear down the establishment that Madara had built. It's not like this would be overly hard to quell, but it would embolden others. He would try to make examples of them, killing them in the most inhumane ways possible. However, ruling with fear causes him to lose more support, causing more uprisings to take place, this time larger and more organized. And the longer they rebel against him, the smarter, more strategic, and further organized they become, eventually banding together to form a single coalition from the various other villages. Nothing motivates more than revenge. And it is in this way that I would see the survivors of the Uchiha and Hyuga clans joining up with these groups. The Uchiha are particularly important, as the destruction of the village and clan proper would awaken many Mangekyo Sharingan. I could see the coalition getting at least a couple of the tailed beasts through battles. It slowly becomes apparent that force will not bring peace, only more war. The only thing left to do is completely disarm humanity. To do this, whether they're under his control or not, Madara would systematically begin targeting the many shinobi villages, eradicating them and cataloging their techniques and jutsu and keeping them hidden, forbidding the teaching of these techniques except by those who serve as members of his own forces. But every time he tightens his grip, more people slip through his fingers, and the more people who slip through, the more that fall into the hands of the resistance. Time passes, and it continues to be rather on and off in the war with the rebels. Madara can't find them, and they can't bring Madara down. However, the war rages on with neither side giving in. This would go on until Madara begins to get into his 80s. At this time, he becomes much too old to do much more than travel from one side of the room to the other. That is how weak he has become, and the rebels know this. Many of the warriors fighting here are either the children of those from the Hidden Leaf or even the grandchildren of them. They would eventually attempt to dethrone Madara, but it's at this time that Madara would awaken his Rinnegan. He had thought that they would never awaken, but suddenly they appeared. He laments that he's too old to do much about them. It was at this time that the resistance was trying to kill him though, so even if it was late, it was perfectly timed in its own way. He looks back on his life and knows from the start that it was all futile, as many things in life are. In his own way, he was trying to bring peace, but it invited war, which was a part of the endless cycle of cause and effect that he had come to realize made up this reality. Using his Rinnegan, he had managed to do a few feats of strength that could drive off those pursuing him. But at this point, Madara's whole worldview physically and metaphysically changes. It no longer matters if he loses his throne because he has just won the war. With the few of his guards he could find to protect him, he escapes his home into the wilderness where he would flee to the mountain's graveyard. There he manages to summon the Geto statue. He uses it to keep himself alive for a time longer. He starts to understand the abilities of the Rinnegan and would then form a new plan. He needed to transplant his Rinnegan to someone nearby and then allow himself to die. That person would then be forced to use Outer Path Samsara of Heavenly Life technique to revive Madara in a younger body. Madara would then reclaim his Rinnegan. He'd begin sealing the tailed beasts into the demonic statue of the Outer Path, holding on to those who come after one of the tailed beasts he's missing. Meanwhile, Madara cultivates an army of Zetsu formed from the cells of Hashirama Senju. It would be here that Black Zetsu would appear, tricking Madara into thinking he made it. After preparations were completed, Madara would begin to move. He would go after the tailed beasts that he lost to the resistance. Of course, they would show resistance, and even a few believing him to be a specter of the past, not sure how he reclaimed his youth. But the Uchiha within the resistance would note the appearance of the Rinnegan within him, and believe that it's a power given to him by the Rinnegan. After all, it was said to make one the master over life and death. Madara would be even stronger here than he was all the years before, not just because of his Rinnegan, but because of all of the experience he gained back in the day. Madara, at this moment, has become the embodiment of the phrase, "youth is wasted on the young." Madara right now, due to his Rinnegan and Elder's experience, can make full use of the potential of his youthful body, and he does exactly that. Even with the Jinchuriki and their tailed beasts working in conjunction with each other, even entering tailed beast mode, there's no standing against him. Not when he has his own tailed beasts and the Geto statue, which he can effortlessly summon to shoot chakra chains out and bind the tailed beasts. And with the army of Zetsu he's cultivated, he would be able to utterly obliterate the entirety of the resistance and or military, should one have formed in the lands he abandoned in his old age. He would eventually gather all of the tailed beasts together and feed them to the Geto statue, which would then bloom into the God Tree. This was it, Madara's plan. When reality is a disappointment, change reality. And what is reality except what the brain perceives? He would use the power of the Ten Tails to cast an incredible genjutsu over the entire world, using the moon as a stand-in for his own eyes. In this way, he would cast the infinite Tsukiyomi. He'd create a world for people of their own desires, a world he would control, a world where there were only winners, a world where there was only peace and happiness, a world of only light. That is his plan. However, right as he casts it, the black Zetsu that has guided his past thus far rears its ugly head. It would suddenly cover Madara and use him as a vector with which to revive its master. Honestly, thinking about this, it's almost like Madara was the first person in the series to bear a karma seal. I mean, yeah, it's definitely different. He didn't get a mark and it was through Zetsu, not the seal, but functionally, it's the same. Kaguya would appear and take over the body of Madara. She would then use the infinite Tsukiyomi to reclaim all of the chakra in the world that her son, the Sage of Six Paths, had dispersed across the world, effectively ending it. It's a sad ending, but let's continue a little longer. After all, there is a bit of an internal clan conflict about to happen. Kaguya would reclaim all of her chakra and then use the Ten Tails to create a Zetsu army because she knows what she's been expecting for years. She won't be the only Otsutsuki on the surface of the planet for much longer. She's allowed maybe 17 to 30 years. She'd continue trying to strengthen herself, knowing that the main branch would eventually show up for her. But it's not too much longer after absorbing Madara and all the chakra on Earth. Knowing about his ancestors' revival and what she has done, Toneri would decide that it is his duty to retake Hamura's will and eliminate Kaguya and the Ten Tails. He isn't able to do much, but I would assume that the moon she's using for the infinite Tsukiyomi would start coming apart at the seams and rain down upon the Earth in an attempt to utterly decimate its face and hopefully destroy Kaguya. However, Kaguya is incredibly strong, so I could see it more along the lines that she would simply destroy the moon and Toneri alongside it. And thus, Kaguya would finally get some peace for a time, served by her Zetsu army and fortifying herself. The question is if Jigen would survive the Tsukiyomi, and if he did, what could he do? Ishiki is in an imperfect vessel. He would hate Kaguya with a passion, and if he survived the infinite Tsukiyomi, he might attempt to get revenge on her, but more than likely would be unable to do anything. It's possible he might contact the rest of the Otsutsuki. I would see him teaming up more with Momoshiki and Kinshiki when they show up. And trust me, they show up, and they find exactly what they're looking for. Momoshiki is strong, but we might be able to say that Kaguya has indeed grown stronger from the nature energy she would still be absorbing and turning into chakra. In a battle, she might just be able to defeat Momoshiki, but the moment that Momoshiki absorbs Kinshiki, and more than likely Jigen as well since he's too warped up to be of too much more help, Kinshiki would likely have everything it takes to utterly destroy Kaguya. He likely would take both her Ten Tails as well as her chakra, and grow stronger himself. He would feel that this is his birthright, and it likely is. Kaguya was never supposed to have this for herself. She was supposed to be the sacrifice to the Ten Tails so that Ishiki could claim the chakra fruit and possibly even deliver it to Momoshiki. Madara might be spit out of Kaguya for a moment after Kaguya has her chakra and the tailed beast removed. There he would see a dead world with nothing but dead Zetsu and a single Otsutsuki standing there. Madara would then die. Bummer of a story, but interesting nonetheless. And while it didn't have a very happy ending, I mean, what did you expect? We let the bad guy win. I hope you all enjoyed the story. What do you think? Leave a comment and tell me how you think things would go any differently. I want to know what you all think would happen. And once you're done doing that, would you consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't already? It'll help the channel bunches. Be sure to ring the bell as well if you want to be notified when we drop more videos like this. Peace.